My name is Liam Harper. I'm 27, a freelance carpenter living in a small town just off Lake Erie, Ohio. It's the kind of place where the air smells like pine and water, where folks still wave from their porches. And the biggest news is when the diner changes its pie recipe. I've been around sawdust and varnish my whole life. My dad was the best handyman in the county until he passed 5 years ago. I inherited his tools, his work ethic, and a knack for keeping my head down. Love drama. Not my thing. I like my life. Simple with nails, a steady paycheck, and a quiet night with a beer by the lake. That was my plan anyway, until a phone call in early June turned everything sideways. Liam, you still fixing houses? The voice on the other end was warm but measured, like she was testing the waters. Sophia Bennett, Alex's older sister. Alex was my best friend growing up, the guy I'd spend summers with, fishing off the pier or sneaking beers behind his dad's shed. He moved to New York 5 years back, chasing some finance job. But Sophia stayed. She was 39 now, 12 years older than me, divorced for a couple of years, living alone in their family's old lake house. Back when I was a kid, she was just the grown-up who'd roll her eyes at our dumb pranks. I hadn't seen her in years. Hadn't thought about her much either until that call. The roof's leaking and the deck's a mess, she said. If you're free this summer, I could use you. I didn't think twice. Work was work, and I needed a project to fill the quiet months. I'm in, I said. I'll swing by tomorrow. The next morning, I loaded my truck with tools, saws, hammers, a ladder, and drove the 20 minutes to her place. The lake house sat on a quiet stretch of shoreline, surrounded by tall pines, and a gravel path that crunched under my tires. It was old but sturdy, with weathered cedar siding and a wide deck that wrapped around the back facing the water. The roof had seen better days, and the deck was a hazard. Rotted planks, loose railings, the kind of mess that would take weeks to fix. Sophia was waiting on the porch when I pulled up. She wore jeans and a loose white shirt, her dark hair tied back in a messy bun. She wasn't the teenage girl I remembered, all giggles and ponytail. This Sophia was different. Calm, steady, with eyes that held a story she wasn't telling. There was a quiet strength to her, but something fragile too, like a pane of glass that had been cracked but not shattered. She gave me a small smile, not forced, but careful, like she was sizing me up. Liam Harper, all grown up, she said, crossing her arms. You still breaking things just to fix them? I grinned, hauling my toolbox out of the truck. Only when I'm bored. You still bossing Alex around? She laughed softly. He's in New York, so I have to settle for bossing contractors now. We walked around the house as she pointed out the damaged leaks in the roof, warped boards on the deck, a few windows that wouldn't seal right. I nodded, taking notes, already mapping out the job in my head. It was a big project, probably 2 months if I worked steady. Sophia didn't hover. She let me poke around, measure beams, and tap on walls while she headed inside to the kitchen. I caught glimpses of her through the window, moving with a kind of grace that didn't try too hard, stirring something on the stove, wiping down a counter. That first day, I sat up on the deck tearing out rotted planks. The lake was calm, reflecting the late morning sun, and the air smelled like wet earth and cedar. Sophia brought out a glass of iced tea around noon, setting it on a railing without a word. I thanked her, and she just nodded her eyes, lingering on me for a second before she turned back to the house. It wasn't much, but that look stuck with me, like she saw something I didn't. The rest of the week followed the same rhythm. I'd show up at 8, work on the deck or climb onto the roof, and Sophia would drift in and out, gardening, reading on the porch, or cooking something that made the air smell like herbs and butter. We didn't talk much at first. She'd ask about the repairs. I'd ask about Alex. And that was it. Safe, simple, like two people sharing a space without stepping on each other's toes. But by the end of the first week, something shifted. She started lingering longer when she brought me water or checked on my progress. One afternoon, she leaned against a post, watching me sand a new plank. "You're good at this," she said, her voice soft but not patronizing. "Your dad would have been proud." I paused, the sander buzzing in my hand. Nobody had mentioned my dad in a while. "Thanks," I said, meeting her eyes. They were hazel flecked with gold, and they held mine a beat too long. My chest tightened just for a second, and I looked away, focusing on the wood, just doing what I know. She nodded and walked off, but I could still feel her gaze like a weight I didn't mind carrying. That night, driving home, I caught myself thinking about her. Not the job, not the lake house, but her. The way she moved, the way her voice stayed steady. Even when her eyes betrayed something softer, I shook it off, told myself it was nothing. Just a long day, too much sun, too little sleep. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. Something about Sophia Bennett was already pulling me in, and I wasn't sure I wanted to pull back. The next week at Sophia's lake house settled into a rhythm, but it wasn't the kind I was used to. I'd show up at dawn, the lake still cloaked in mist, and get to work on the deck or the roof. The smell of sawdust and lake water filled the air, and the steady hum of my tools kept my mind focused. Or at least it was supposed to. Sophia was always around, never hovering, just there moving through her day with that quiet grace that made it hard to look away. I'd catch her watering her garden or carrying a book to the porch, and every time I'd feel that same tug in my chest from that first week. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just a long summer job. But the way my pulse quickened when she walked by said otherwise. By mid-June, the deck was coming along, new planks, laid railings reinforced, but the roof was a beast. Leaky shingles, warped beams, the kind of job that would test even my dad's patience. Sophia would check in now and then, asking about progress or if I needed anything. Her questions were practical. How is the sealant holding, or need more nails? But her voice had this warmth that made them feel like more than just small talk. I'd answer, keep it short, and get back to work. But I started looking forward to those moments. They broke up the monotony, sure, but it was more than that. It was her. One afternoon, the sky turned ugly fast. Dark clouds rolled in over the lake, and the air got heavy thick with the promise of rain. I was up on the roof, wrestling with a stubborn patch of shingles when the first drops hit. I figured I could beat the storm, get a few more nails in, but the rain didn't care about my plans. Came down hard, sheets of it, slapping the roof, soaking my shirt in seconds. I scrambled to grab my tools, but the ladder was slick and my boots slipped on the rung. Next thing I knew, I was sliding, then falling, landing with a thud in the muddy grass below. Sophia's voice cut through the rain. I looked up, blinking water out of my eyes, and there she was, running out from the porch, barefoot in a thin summer dress that clung to her as the rain soaked through. Her hair was already matted to her face, but she didn't care. "You okay?" she called, kneeling beside me, her hands hovering like she wasn't sure whether to touch me. I groaned, sitting up, my jeans caked with mud. "Think I'm just bruised," I said, managing a half smile. "But I could use a towel or maybe some ginger tea to save my pride." She stared at me for a second, then laughed. Not the polite chuckle she'd given me before, but a real laugh, bright and unguarded, like something she'd forgotten she could do. It lit up her face, softened the lines around her eyes, and for a moment, she wasn't the composed woman who'd hired me. She was just Sophia, rain-soaked and alive. "Come on," she said, standing and offering her hand. "Let's get you out of this mess." Inside, she tossed me a towel and pointed me to the kitchen. The house smelled like fresh herbs and lemon cleaner, warm against the chill of my wet clothes. She boiled water for tea, her dress still dripping, and I tried not to notice how it hugged her frame. "You're gonna catch a cold running out like that," I said, drying my hands. "Says the guy who just fell off my roof." She shot back, a playful edge in her voice. She handed me a mug, her fingers brushing mine for a split second. It was nothing, but my skin felt it like a spark. We sat at her small kitchen table, the rain pounding outside, steam rising from our mugs. The silence wasn't awkward, but it wasn't empty either. It felt like we were both waiting for something to shift. "You didn't have to come out in the storm," I said, breaking the quiet. "I would have survived." She looked at me over the rim of her mug, her hazel eyes steady. "Maybe I wasn't worried about you surviving. Maybe I just didn't want you out there alone." I didn't know what to say to that. Her words hung there, simple but heavy, and I felt that tug again, stronger this time. I sipped my tea, trying to focus on the ginger's bite instead of the way her gaze made my chest tight. "Well, thanks," I said finally. Not used to people checking on me. She tilted her head, studying me. "You're not as tough as you pretend to be. Liam Harper." There was no judgment in her voice, just a quiet observation like she'd seen something I hadn't meant to show. The rest of the afternoon we talked, not about the roof or the deck, but real things. How she used to spend summers here as a kid. How the lake felt like the only place she could breathe after her divorce. She didn't spill everything, but she let me in just enough to see the cracks beneath her calm. "It's strange," she said, staring out the window at the rain. "This house is all I have left of them, Mom, Dad, Alex. But sometimes it feels like I'm rattling around in it, like I don't belong." I wanted to say something profound, but all I managed was, "You belong here more than you think." She smiled, small but real, and I felt like I'd said the right thing for once. When the rain slowed, I grabbed my tools and headed back to the deck. My clothes still damp, but my head clearer. Sophia watched me from the porch, her arms crossed, her dress still clinging to her. I pretended not to notice, but I did. Every glance, every word we'd shared, it was building something I couldn't name yet. As I hammered a new plank into place, I caught her looking at me from the corner of my eye, her expression unreadable, but soft. And for the first time I wondered if she felt it too. This quiet pull. This thing neither of us was ready to admit. July settled over the lake like a warm blanket, the days long and hazy, the air thick with the scent of pine and sun-warmed water. I was halfway through the repairs on Sophia's lake house. The deck now solid underfoot, the roof patched and holding strong. My morning started with coffee and a thermos, my tools spread out like old friends, and the quiet rhythm of work. But it wasn't just the job keeping me anchored here. It was her, Sophia. Every day I found myself waiting for the sound of her footsteps on the porch. The way she'd lean against a post and ask about my progress with that half-smile that felt like a secret meant just for me. We'd fallen into a routine, if you could call it that. I'd work through the morning, and around noon, she'd bring out something water lemonade once, even a sandwich stacked with turkey and avocado. Our conversation started small, the best stained for cedar, how Alex was doing in New York, whether the lake was too cold for a swim. But they grew like the slow unfurling of a leaf. She'd linger longer, her questions turning personal. "You ever think about leaving this town, Liam?" she'd ask. Or, "What's the one thing you'd build if you could build anything?" I'd answer, keeping it light. But her eyes had a way of pulling out truths I didn't mean to share. One evening, after a long day of sanding beam, she brought out 2 glasses of white wine and set them on the deck's new railing. The sun was dipping below the pines, painting the lake gold. I wiped the sawdust off my hands and sat beside her on the steps, the wood still warm from the day. "You don't have to keep feeding me, you know," I said, taking a sip. The wine was crisp, colder than I expected. She shrugged her hair, catching the light as she tucked a strand behind her ear. "Maybe I like the company." Her voice was soft, but there was a weight to it, like she was testing the air between us. I looked at her, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The lake lapped gently against the shore, and I felt that pull again, stronger now, like a current I couldn't swim against. "You don't get much of that out here, do you?" I asked. "Company, I mean." She stared at the water, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "Not the kind that matters after the divorce. It's like I forgot how to let people in this house. It's safe, but it's lonely, too." Her voice cracked just a little, and I saw it. The fragility she hid so well, the part of her that was still picking up pieces. I wanted to reach out to say something that would make it better, but all I could manage was, "I get it. After my dad died, I kept everyone at arm's length. Easier that way." She turned to me, her hazel eyes searching mine, and I felt exposed, like she could see the parts of me I'd nailed shut years ago. "You don't seem like the kind who pushes people away," she said quietly. I laughed short and rough. "I'm good at faking it." She didn't laugh back. Instead, she reached out her hand, brushing mine where it rested on the step. It wasn't much, just a fleeting touch, but it sent a jolt through me like the first spark of a fire. "You don't have to fake it with me, Liam." she said. And the way she said my name, soft, deliberate, made my throat tighten. We sat there as the sky darkened, the wine forgotten, talking about things I hadn't told anyone in years. How I'd wanted to be an architect once before Dad's tools became my life. How she'd dreamed of traveling the world before her marriage tied her down. The air between us felt alive, charged, but we both kept a careful distance. There was an unspoken line, her being Alex's sister, the 12 years between us, the way this town loved to talk. Crossing it felt dangerous, but not crossing it was starting to feel worse. A few days later, that line got blurrier. I was working on the deck railing when my phone buzzed. A text from Alex. "Yo, how's the lake house coming?" Sophia says, "You're killing it." My stomach twisted. Alex, the guy who'd been my best friend since we were 10, who'd probably lose it if he knew I was sitting here thinking about his sister's smile. I texted back something vague. It's coming along, and shoved my phone in my pocket. But when Sophia came out with a glass of water, her eyes caught mine. And then I wondered if she'd told Alex anything, if she felt this too, if she was as scared of it as I was. "Everything okay?" she asked, handing me the glass. Her fingers brushed mine again, and this time they lingered a second longer. My pulse kicked up, and I nodded, not trusting my voice. She didn't push, just gave me that half smile and went back inside. But the air felt heavier now, like we were both carrying something we couldn't say out loud. That night, as I packed up my tools, she called me from the kitchen. "Liam, you want to stay for dinner? I made too much pasta." It was a simple offer, but it felt like more. I hesitated, thinking of Alex, of the 12 years, of the way her touch still burned on my skin. "Sure," I said finally, and followed her inside. The table was set for two, and as we sat down, her knee brushed mine under the table. Neither of us moved away. I knew then we were treading into something deeper, something we'd have to keep quiet. Not just from Alex, but from the whole damn town. And yet, as I looked at her across the table, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the lamp, I wasn't sure I cared anymore. August rolled in, and the lake house was nearly done. The deck gleamed with fresh stain. The roof no longer leaked, and I'd started painting the kitchen, the last big job before I'd pack up and move on. The air was thick with summer heat, the kind that stuck to your skin. But the lake breeze carried a hint of coolness, like a promise of fall. I'd grown used to the rhythm of Sophia's place, the creak of the porch, the hum of cicadas, the way the light hit the water at dusk. But more than that, I'd grown used to her, to the way she'd sit nearby while I worked, reading or sipping tea. Her presence like a steady pulse I couldn't ignore. Our dinners had become a habit. Not every night, but often enough that I started keeping a clean shirt in my truck. We'd sit at her small table, plates of pasta or grilled fish between us, talking about everything and nothing. Old movies, the best way to grill corn, the time Alex and I got stuck on a sandbar in his dad's canoe. But there were moments, too, when the conversation dipped deeper. She'd talk about her ex, how he'd left her feeling like a ghost in her own life. I'd share how I'd buried myself in work after my dad died, afraid to want anything that could break. Each word felt like peeling back a layer, and every time our eyes met, the air grew heavier, like we were circling something neither of us dared to name. I was painting the kitchen cabinets one afternoon, the smell of fresh paint mixing with the lavender from her garden. Sophia was at the counter chopping vegetables, her movements slow and deliberate. The radio played some old jazz tunes, soft and unhurried. I caught her watching me. Her knife paused mid-chop, and when I looked back, she didn't look away. "You're going to ruin that carrot if you keep staring," I said, trying to keep it light. She smiled, but it was different. Soft, unguarded, like she'd let a wall fall. "You're good at this, Liam," she said, setting the knife down. "Not just the painting, the way you show up every day, no matter what." I wiped my hands on a rag, my heart picking up. "It's just a job," I said. But the words felt hollow even to me. She shook her head, stepping closer. "It's not just a job. You're here and you see me. Not the sister, not the divorce. Say me." Her voice was low, steady, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear, like she'd said too much. I didn't know how to respond. My throat felt tight, and the paintbrush in my hand suddenly seemed like the only thing keeping me grounded. "Sophia," I started, but she held up a hand stopping me. "Don't say anything yet," she said. "Just let me finish this dinner." She turned back to the counter, but the air had changed, charged with something we couldn't ignore. That night, the rain came again, a steady drum against the windows. We ate in the kitchen, the table lit by a single lamp, the pasta cooling untouched. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it was full, like we were both holding our breath. I could feel her across the table, her knee close to mine, her fingers tracing the edge of her wine glass. Every glance felt like a step toward a line we hadn't crossed. "Tomorrow's your last day, isn't it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my chest tightening. "Yeah, got a job lined up down south. 3 months." She looked down at her plate, her fingers still on the glass. 3 months, she repeated like she was testing the weight of it. Then she stood, walked to my side of the table, and stopped just close enough that I could smell the faint lavender on her skin. I looked up, and her eyes locked onto mine, unflinching. "Liam," she said, her voice soft but sure. "Do you know you stop breathing every time I look at you a little too long?" I froze my hand, gripping the edge of the table. "I didn't think you noticed I managed my voice rough." She smiled small and sad. "I noticed the first week you got here, and you know what? Every time you call my name from the yard or lean over that damn toolbox, my heart does this thing where it forgets how to settle." She took a step closer, her hand resting on the back of my chair close enough that I could feel the warmth of her. "I've spent 2 years telling myself I don't get to want anything. But you make me want to try again." My pulse was hammering now, every word hitting like a wave. I wanted to reach for her to close the distance, but I couldn't move. Alex's face flashed in my mind, the years of friendship, the way he'd laugh if he knew, the way he might not. The 12 years between us, the town that had talked. But her eyes, those hazel eyes, flecked with gold, held me there, and none of it mattered as much as her standing in front of me. "I don't know what this is," I said finally, my voice low. "But I feel it too, and it scares the hell out of me." She nodded like she'd expected that. "Me too. But I'm tired of being scared." She paused, then leaned down, her face, inches from mine. "If you come back in October, Liam, the deck might need another coat of stain. And I'll still be here." I swallowed hard, my hand twitching to touch her. But I didn't. "Not yet. I'll think about it," I said. But my voice betrayed me. It wasn't just thinking. It was a promise. Sophia was on the porch when I came to say goodbye, wrapped in a soft gray sweater, her hair loose and catching the early light. She held a mug of coffee, her hazel eyes steady, but softer than usual, like she was holding something back. "You sure you got everything?" she asked, her voice light, but with an edge I couldn't place. I patted my toolbox, forcing a smile. Tools check. Pride mostly intact. "I'm good." I wanted to keep it easy, to pretend last night's conversation hadn't turned my world upside down. Her words still echoed in my head. How she'd noticed me stopped breathing under her gaze. How her heart stumbled when I called her name. I'd barely slept, replaying every syllable, every glance. She stepped off the porch, closing the distance between us. "You did good work, Liam," she said, her eyes searching mine. "The house hasn't looked this alive in years." "It's a good house," I said, my voice rougher than I meant. "Just needed some care." She tilted her head, her lips curving into that half-smile I'd come to know too well. "So do people." Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, pressing it into my hand. Her fingers lingered against mine, warm and deliberate. "Don't read it now," she said. "Wait till you're gone." "Ill," I nodded, slipping the paper into my jacket pocket. My heart was pounding, but I didn't trust myself to say anything more. "I'll be back in October," I said, finally echoing her words from last night. "Deck might need another coat of stain." She laughed softly, the sound warm against the cool morning air. "I'll be here." Her eyes held mine for a moment longer, and I felt it again. That pull, that current we'd been circling all summer. Then she stepped back and I climbed into my truck. "Liam, the hardest thing to fix isn't rotted wood or a leaking roof. It's a heart that's forgotten how to beat again. You reminded me mine still can. Don't let yours stay quiet too long, Sophia. She straightened her smile, soft but steady. Good. She walked back to her side of the table, picked up her glass, and took a sip like nothing had happened. But everything had. The rain kept falling, and I sat there, my heart pounding, knowing I'd never see this house or her the same way again. The morning I left Sophia's lake house, the world felt quieter than it should have. Dawn broke over Lake Erie, painting the water in shades of pink and silver, the mist curling off the surface like a whisper. I packed my tools into the truck before the sun was fully up, the air sharp with the promise of fall. The deck was finished, the roof solid, the kitchen cabinets gleaming with fresh paint. I'd done what I came to do, but as I stood on the gravel path, the weight of leaving settled in my chest like a stone. It wasn't just the job I was leaving behind. It was her. As I drove away, the lake house shrank in my rearview mirror, the pines blurring into a green haze. The road wound along the shoreline, the water glinting through the trees, and I kept one hand on the wheel, the other brushing the paper in my pocket. I waited until I hit the highway miles from her house before I pulled over at a rest stop. The world was still just the hum of distant cars and the rustle of leaves. I unfolded the note, her handwriting, neat but unhurried. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and tucked it into my wallet next to a faded photo of my dad. My chest felt tight, not with pain, but with something else, something alive, something I hadn't let myself feel in years. I sat there staring at the horizon, the lake, a faint shimmer in the distance. That summer had started as just another job, another paycheck, another way to keep my head down. But Sophia had changed that. She'd seen me not just the guy with the tools, but me, Liam, the one who'd been running from anything that felt too real. I thought about her standing on that porch, her life stitched together from broken pieces. I thought about my own, my dad's tools, my quiet nights, the way I'd built walls to keep loss at bay. Sophia's words, her touch, her laugh. They'd crack those walls, let light through. I wasn't sure what October would bring. A new coat of stain, sure, but maybe more. Maybe a chance to let my heart beat again, too. As I started the truck and pulled back onto the highway, the road stretched out ahead, open and uncertain. I didn't have answers. Didn't need them. All I knew was that I'd be back. Not just for the lake house, not just for the work. For her. For the possibility of us. The note in my wallet felt like a promise. Not to her, but to myself. To show up, to try to not let fear win. The lake faded behind me, but Sophia's voice stayed quiet and sure, like the lapping of waves on the shore. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was driving towards something not away from.